Welcome to part 1 of our discussion of HP Lovecraft's short fiction.
We are back. It is November, and we are here ready to unleash some untold horrors of non-Euclidean geometry, the depths of which you will not be able to fathom or convey. Also known as, we're reading Lovecraft today, but in true tradition, we're going to talk about our drink first, so you can imbibe with us, hopefully, as we put it up on the website. So, Sean, you were the bartender with the most today, so what'd you make us, man?
Well, you know, I had to go with the most hideous of drinks, and I thought that I would try and find some nameless terror that would really put us in a singular mood. So I went with my go-to and favorite standby, the Kraken, which I think tentacularly really meets the requirements for this particular cast. So we were drinking Kraken rum, which I cannot recommend enough. By the way, good people at Kraken. We're always looking for sponsorships and co-work, so we would love to do some work with you. We love the Kraken. And it's a ginger beer in Kraken with a little bit of lime wedge in there and some love. And we've got this cyclopean ice block that Mike provided that is pretty fantastic. I have to say, I'm really digging the big piece of ice.
Yeah, I mean, it's made an appearance in several podcasts now, I believe. And I have to say now that I am on my third of these drinks. I'm on the verge, I feel, of descending into a sort of madness from which it'll be impossible to return to everyday life.
Blasphemous.
Yeah.
You will be accursed by those words, my friend.
That is right.
It's loathing.
Just As I drove in, I just saw visions of untold, blind, and mostly white penguins, and I was just so deathly afraid in pits of despair in my soul that I could not communicate through anything besides scientific notes.
I feel like I'm going to faint from that.
I think we've hit many of them so far. Has anyone said Eldritch yet?
Not yet.
No.
Okay. All right, we're still looking for Eldritch.
All right.
Well, we'll call this drink the Eldritch.
The Eldritch Kraken.
Here's to the Eldritch. All right, so make sure you get yourself some Kraken, some ginger beer, and a lime wedge there, and we'll meet you on the other side.
Don't forget the cyclopean ice cube.
True. Hopefully dating back prior to Precambrian to the Archean time period. Am I saying that right?
It sounds right.
Sure, Archean. Half that shit time period is made up anyways from the 1920s. So.
But make sure you get the correct cyclopean cubes, because these ones do not conform to any known understanding of Euclidean geometry.
Indeed. There's arches, but also cubes dangling off of this ice cube in remnants and patterns such that only the great old ones could find their way through.
There are angles here that should not be.
Cheers, fuckers.
Cheers. Cheers, nerds. All right, welcome back. Hopefully you have imbibed as much as we have, and maybe we'll tone down the Lovecraftian conversation. You can only imagine the emails we've been sending back and forth, and the sentence length has jumped up to like 30 words per sentence just because that's Lovecraft.
Lots of italics as well.
So many italics. And, you know, that's a great place to start. Let's think about Lovecraft, and I actually had not read him before this, so again, I'm the noob. I'm the uninitiated. And maybe we could just talk about him and his concepts like of cosmic horror, which fill us all with existential dread as we read.
I gotta jump in because I am also unacquainted with
Need a bell.
Oh, the bells! You forgot the bells.
I forgot the bell in my rush.
We should also make this point that Adam really fucked us this night. So
This podcast is an hour later.
Mike and I are completely hammered, and Adam is catching up. So
I am slowly but surely catching up. So they're going to be the entertainment tonight, and I'm just going to be that.
we need a bell app. Mike, find a bell app. Anyway, I have also.
What Sean meant to say is that he's a virgin when it comes to Lovecraft.
Yes, I am aware of Lovecraft and his legacy and influence. However, I had never really read Lovecraft for any extended periods of time. So I'm with you on this, Adam.
All right.
Mike is the expert in this one compared to us.
Although Sean says this wearing the Cthulhu, or maybe it's a Hydra shirt. I think it's Cthulhu, though.
I think it's just some random octopus thing. My wife gave it for me for my birthday. I always got to bring it. I bring the podcast
Yeah, you do bring the shirts.
wardrobe.
If we had a bell, I would give you a bell for that one, sir.
We should make
You
Adam
want to
say
just
Dan.
smack the back of my head every time this happens? That's a point for Mike. Back, sorry. So two of us are new, and Mike doesn't want to take the mantle of expert here, but I think he deserves it. Can you at least, Professor, take us to school for a second when it comes to like Lovecraft's I guess angle on the horror genre? Because that's why we picked it for this month.
Right.
It is, everything is dying and slowly creeping away from us.
Thanksgiving is terrible.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so Lovecraft, is famous for sort of, I don't know if I want to say that he pioneered, but he certainly is associated with the cosmic horror concept, which is the idea that humanity is a very tiny, minuscule piece of a vast universe, which is, hopefully ambivalent to us, but is often hostile to us. And that man was not meant to perceive most of it. And when a human, usually say a narrator, is granted some sort of insight into, let's say, what's really going on, then it almost always results in insanity and or death.
Or blind penguins. Sorry, that's my only beef with what we read. That's it.
I like the blind penguins,
Yeah,
man.
we'll get to that later.
that.
That's
I'm
also
jumping ahead to Mountains
it's
of
also a
Madness,
Poe
but-
reference, by the way. So I mean,
Oh,
it sounds
okay,
like
that
you
went over my
have
head.
sounds like you have a beef with Edgar Allan Poe, sir.
I might.
That's okay. That's
Yeah.
all right. Actually, I actually
Fucking
read.
weirdo.
True. Yeah.
I actually read the story that many of the references from Mountains of Madness are drawn from the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, and it's not very good.
See? But anyways, that's
So,
okay.
we were discussing cosmic horror, right? And I was saying very intelligent things, I feel like.
I gotta interrupt you because I remember you saying to me that you started reading Lovecraft when you were, what'd you say, 12?
Ish.
God
yeah.
damn.
That
sir.
explains so much about who Mike is
Of why
today.
Mike is smarter than
Does
me?
it? I don't
I don't know about that, but I'm thinking like his proclivity for certain thoughts.
I'm not sure what that's a reference to. I'm just going to assume it's a compliment.
Yeah, of course, that's all I meant, right?
Untold horrors and depths into the chasm that we look at.
No, this is absolutely correct, and this is the book right here that started it all. This
That's
is
your
the
book
copy.
from when you were 12?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
Road to
and
Madness.
you can see this is not unlike certain ancient texts that Lovecraft himself speaks of that are.
What makes a 12-year-old boy pick up this book and go, you know what? You can't see it.
Do
But
you,
yes,
do you
our listeners-
accidentally think that the one on the left is a woman and that's a naked person?
it looks like a Marilyn Manson video come to life.
Our listeners cannot, of course, see the cover that Sean is referring to, but
Put it in the show notes.
But a 12-year-old Mike was wandering around a Barnes & Noble with no idea what he was looking for, and this cover, as it would for anyone, caught my eye. But whereas most people, not unlike Lovecraft's own narrators, would have gone screaming away in madness and told everyone that they are only speaking because they're trying to protect humanity.
Giving small hints, but sometimes giving such precise academic details.
Yes, exactly. Unlike most of them, I was fascinated. I picked this book up and I started reading it, and I was hooked from the beginning. I must have killed this book in like 2 days.
Wow.
And it started I don't read Lovecraft that much anymore for many different reasons, but mostly just because I've exhausted it. There's no more to read.
I have to say, I think Adam and I are proverbially doing the "We're Not Worthy" from Wayne's World. At 12, you
Quite
read
literally.
through a 400-page tome of Lovecraft.
Well, it was
Not nothing.
Yeah, but I mean, let's not make the mistake of pretending that was a habit of mine, that I often did that, and I just was consuming literature, because that was not the case. But
Mike moved on to Dante and Diderot.
Although, if you do want to talk about twisted, weird literature, Dante's a great one to get into. There is some fucked up shit.
Future cast!
There you go.
Hit us in
The Inferno would be an amazing future cast, but this was some fucked up shit, and I loved it. It was amazing.
This explains why we're friends, because one of the earliest books I remember reading is the original Bram Stoker's Dracula. Stoker.
I think that's a different thing, Adam.
Oh, you mean the lady with the big bosoms, and that's not the right cover?
I'm pretty sure you might have read the Dime Store novel version of it.
Yeah, I think she has an OnlyFans account too.
Yeah,
yeah, it's right next to ours.
Isn't it Dildula or something?
Oh God, yeah.
If I wanted to circle back because. Thankfully, we've said all this other stuff that I've remembered the point that I was originally intending to make about cosmic horror, which is that much horror fiction is it's the type of thing. How do I want to put this? It's directly confrontational to mankind, and mankind knows it's under attack, or the characters in the fiction know they're under attack from a vampire or a ghost or something like that, which has, usually direct goals and is directly hostile to us. And we're only trying to figure out, how do we defeat the ghost? How do we defeat the vampire? So it becomes sort of like a grunge match in that way. Yeah. And what separates cosmic horror, what makes it different, is that, these entities, these horrific beings, are not necessarily directly hostile to us as much as they just don't fucking care that we exist, that they barely acknowledge that we exist, and that there is no defeating them. The best we can hope to do is just go unnoticed by them. So I don't know. I think that's an important characteristic of the genre as well.
It's like Lovecraft assumed, he must have been looking at ants or something and thought, what must it be like to be such a tiny being,
to these things.
Right? And then assume, well, wait a minute, there must be someone over us, the same kind of mentality toward, and they're mostly vegetable,
right? Whereas we don't even, this is a great analogy for this actually, because we don't usually notice the insects that we trod upon and destroy. And when we do notice them, we usually kill them anyway. So
without concern.
It's a good place to point out that we are currently, Mike and I have already eaten these things, but Adam is taking down a little
I'm nailing it down.
Squid-based calamari there.
Yeah, so our food choice for the evening is Lovecraftian, absolutely. We went with calamari for obvious reasons. Tentacles and Lovecraft sort of go together.
And hentai.
I was thinking it, actually.
I said it.
There's got to be a Call of Cthulhu hentai out there.
Oh, we should look that up.
Yeah, let's use your phone.
Let's do it. It's at work. Oh. I'm kidding.
But we have the stuffed peppers, because the great old ones are described as mostly vegetable. And we have the mini crab cakes, because the Migo or the Migo, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but the ones from Whisperer are described as crab people. So
fungus
they
crabs.
They also make an appearance in Mountains of Madness.
Well,
I mean, everything actually is very tightly woven together in terms of
that's the mythos and
the Cthulhu mythology,
right? And I guess while we're talking about Lovecraft, that's an important thing to point out is what. The Cthulhu mythos is it's not like a very coherent bunch of fiction that all ties into each other. It's just that Lovecraft, the author, who was, publishing all this stuff randomly in different random weird fiction publications.
A lot of those pulp publications.
Exactly.
Right?
For a pittance was... it was he himself that was doing this. He had these recurring characters and these recurring locations and these recurring species just in his head. And so a reader of one story would read about all this other stuff that Lovecraft had written about without knowing that there were actually stories that also included those things. It's only been in subsequent decades where, this stuff's been bound and collected that people were able... the idea of the mythology, the mythos, didn't even happen in his lifetime. That was something that happened or was coined afterwards.
Oh, that really speaks to the staying power of the mythos and all of his work, the fact that people do the work afterwards, not just to bound it together, because you can do that, Barnes & Noble does that shit for $15 or whatever. I was holding the Mike's version, which apparently he told me is his original, and I just bought mine this summer, and so they haven't updated a single thing about it. It's exactly the same.
I bought that about 11 years ago.
Silver edges and everything.
It's very nice looking, though.
It is. And it's just interesting, though, that people like it and his story so much and the ideas so much that they contribute to it and add scholarship that builds upon the worlds and sees connections that he hadn't intended. So at this point I think we should really start with Call of Cthulhu, because we've been talking about it. I was going to call it the man, but it for most
Eldritch
of it,
horror.
It is on our logo, in one way, shape, or form. So Call of Cthulhu is really interesting to me as we start here, because we had joked around about it and talked about Cthulhu and stuff, and I had no clue what it was. And then coming to the idea, just kind of faked it, coming to the idea of the story, was really intriguing, because everything was all like secondhand accounts and this person reading notes from another person. And I was just wondering what you thought about the premise of the story being told that way. Did that add to your feelings of horror? Did it kind of distance you too much?
Honestly, this is the first time I've actually read the actual Cthulhu story where he makes an appearance, or it makes an appearance in the story. And I have known about this idea for, more than half my life. I remember listening to Ride the Lightning by Metallica and the Call of Cthulhu at the end of it, and just being like, what the hell's a Cthulhu?
Yeah.
And never really understanding it. Exactly. And then you start to become vaguely aware of it as an English major in school, and then just being kind of around that, you start to become peripherally aware of this stuff and the idea of what it is from people who have actually read it, but I never really dove in myself. Where the hell was I going with this?
Premise of the narrator telling us stories of stories they read.
Right, I had an onion tied to my belt, which was the style at the time. So it's just that, coming into it, I had no expectations, zero. And I just assumed that it was going to be this, well done.
I have to catch up.
It was going to be this
I saved the good beer for you guys.
horrifying.
Pabst Blue Ribbon.
I enjoy me a PBR. Horrifying.
Just like that beer.
Ouch. We hipsters brought it back.
I kid.
It was going to die.
I kid. PBR has a special place in everyone's liver. But
It's the left side.
I did not have any expectation, and going into it, I thought that it was, you consider the time frame and, what you know about Lovecraft and that, and I think, this is actually kind of an innovative way to approach, I say innovative, I guess, for the times, but honestly, when I look at it in context now, it's not that innovative. He's got a very Poe-esque style of sort of getting to it, but not actually ever showing you, until the point where the fucking thing appears.
Yeah.
And then it's like, I don't know, should I get to it now or should I wait?
No, go ahead.
Don't cock tease.
We will assume that all our listeners are familiar with the story. If you're not, it's been around for 100 fucking years. What are you doing?
Spoiler alert!
I've also given you plenty of warnings on Instagram.
Fast forward the podcast now, but actually don't.
Yeah. No, you need to hear this. Sean's about to speak.
We need to listen to
about to drop some wisdom.
All I can think about is Cthulhu is this megalithic, King Kong-esque eldritch horror, incredible destroyer of worlds. Yeah. I remember the Simpsons episode they did, the Treehouse of Horror, when they actually had a Cthulhu monster attacking Dunwich or whatever it was in Rhode Island. Oh my god, this thing is going to be epic! And they fucking drove a boat through its head.
Yeah.
And I'm like, are you... What? What the fuck? He just turned the boat around, went full speed straight into the thing's head, and it, severed it into two, and then it cleaved back together.
In italics, no less.
Yes!
The italics brings the dread.
So, honestly, I had this sense of foreboding leading up to him, oh man, these guys are fucking dead. How's this guy gonna get away? This is gonna be interesting. Story. No, he drove his boat through it.
Right.
Well, I mean, it wasn't a dinghy, right? It was like a boat.
It was like a schooner or something. It's a boat. It's not even a fucking, warship.
Now that you say schooner, I'm thinking, like a try-sail,
Yeah.
just going like 15 knots.
Dude, it
Not
was a
very fast.
fishing vessel.
Just
It's
trawling
the old
through it.
man in the sea. You know, he's got his marlin hook,
Oh,
and
my
along comes
God.
Cthulhu, and just like he does with the sharks, he just hits it with a fucking shovel or something.
Everything built up to this moment, and no, you can get away by just driving your boat through its head.
But it comes back together. You didn't
Yeah,
really get away.
but then it's gone.
Right.
It's gone.
Well, the stars weren't right, man. So
Yeah.
this the dread city of Relay
Riley.
sunk back to the bottom of the sea. It is only an untimely earthquake that had thrust it up in the first place. It all holds together, man.
Touche.
Ding, ding,
Touche.
ding.
No. I think this is not an uncommon point to make, that the conclusion of the story is very anticlimactic.
Stephen King must have
Yeah.
learned a lot from reading Lovecraft back in the day.
Ooh.
That's right, Stephen King. Fuck your endings.
There it is.
Oh, all right. Ding. I feel like this is not uncommon for much of the horror genre. Lovecraft himself was, he was the guy who said, and I'm paraphrasing heavily here, but he said that, if the most powerful emotion of mankind is fear, then the most potent kind of fear is fear of the unknown. And that's what the true horror masters do, are they build your fear and suspense without actually showing you what's behind the door.
But he did show us.
But that's exactly the thing. As soon as you open that door, there's going to be disappointment. And that's what's so hard about horror. That's what's so hard about horror movies, horror literature, is because with all that buildup and all that fear of like it could be anything, it's so hard to deliver. But even in that context, I agree with you. The end of this story is very anticlimactic. The horrifying, like 800-foot tall sea beast makes an appearance and is just like supposed to be the most terrifying thing. Like even seeing it drives you mad.
Takes on the great old ones.
Right.
Yes.
Which we find out later, depending on how you read the order of the stories
Right.
you read.
But, even just glimpsing it is supposed to drive you to madness, but you could drive your boat through it. It's a bit, it is
Well, I mean, not everyone
definitely
has a boat.
anticlimactic. That's true.
I'm trying, am I the optimist this time? Is that my role?
It is a fucking amazing
'Cause
story.
I really did-
I'm
I
not gonna
enjoyed
say there's not another word
No.
of criticism that I have for that story.
Oh, we're going to find that.
But I will say, maybe because we had personally built up so much about the mythos that I had actually, really put it up there. And I'm reading through it and I'm like, okay, so there's these cults around the world that are, secretly trying to bring it back, waiting for the stars to align, and then waiting for the earthquake to bring up the city. Okay, so we get that. All right, so things are lining up. And I expected, again, even at least, a 3-5-page battle.
Yeah.
And we get maybe a 2-page battle, right?
It was a
If that,
paragraph.
a paragraph. now, and that was probably a sentence. So the funny thing is, I really like his writing style.
Yeah.
His word choice is exquisite. Makes me go back to the dictionary often, which I appreciate. That's not usually what happens.
That's
with
not my
modern
cup of
literature.
tea, and I'm usually the Hemingway school of thought,
Yeah.
where
Right.
terse is good. But at the same time, I have to agree with you. I found it to be not like your typical florid style of the 19th century, but it was something on itself, and it was not burdensome to read, but it didn't go by too quickly either. It challenged you a little bit.
Yeah, it
And I was okay with
demands
it.
your attention.
It hit a sweet spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did actually get some vibes of Arthur Conan Doyle. Just in the sentence length and some of the word choice. I mean, they were nearly contemporary, so that kind of makes sense in that way.
Right.
But at the same time, different in that I feel like Conan Doyle focused a lot more on the sensory details because Holmes is trying to deduce things from what we're talking about, whereas Lovecraft, all of his narrators are I have to tell you this thing, but I can't tell you directly because I
Right.
don't want to make you mad.
Right.
Yeah.
Literally insane.
You mentioned Stoker's Dracula earlier, and everything about
I
it.
think I called him Stroker.
Yeah,
but
well, I
that
tried
was
to correct
gracious.
it.
That was gracious of you.
You're welcome. I kept reminding myself of that style of horror, of the sort of third party, like, oh, this all happened, and we're just telling you about it after the fact.
Right.
Which to me almost eliminates some of the tenseness and eliminates some of the payoff and I think people realize that you can't say, oh, this all happened before, and I'm telling you about it now, because that takes the stakes completely out of it.
Sure.
You know, like, and for a modern audience anyway, maybe
Yeah.
a more turn of the century audience would have been like, oh, but what about everybody else?
Right.
It's like, I don't give a fuck about everybody else. I care about the
It's not me,
narrator and what happened to
goddammit.
that, and then me. Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that might have translated differently now, but back then it was much more horrifying.
You know, though, I will say, like, I know I'm kind of jumping because we were looking to get to some cultural references later after we talked a little bit more about the texts.
So why even have an agenda, Adam?
Bring him in.
I'm
What do
the
you got?
captain, thank you. This is the choice the captain's
Yeah,
making.
he's actually wearing a uniform tonight.
Fall in
so
line.
we have to obey him.
No, I'm just thinking, like, so, in a way, Lovecraft is kind of like the predecessor to some of, like, the docu-horrors, where you take on that fake documentary, you found this footage, like Blair Witch comes to
Yeah.
mind, not only because of the content, cult people trying to call forth some demonic powers that they're unable to control, and oh fuck, go figure, you're
Right.
screwed up and can't control it.
Cloverfield,
Right?
Yeah.
But it's also that documentary style where I wasn't there, I found this footage, I'm discovering it with you.
right.
Which is that sort of premise.
Well, and those specific films that you just named also fit Lovecraftian horror in the sense of,
Cosmic
like,
horror.
in the sense of it's never explained what you're actually up against. In the Blair Witch, there's really no backstory offered.
No.
And in Cloverfield, we see the monster a bit on film, but it's not one time explained what it is or where it came from. As I remember, it's been many years. But
No.
and that's the idea of Lovecraftian horror, is that, like, it's not a specific thing that we are facing for the first time, but we could learn about this vampire or this werewolf and its backstory, and that's not how Lovecraftian horror works. And that's what it does, is it pits its characters and mankind against things that are just beyond our comprehension and have almost no backstory and no explanation because we can't perceive them.
It's beyond the comprehension.
Right.
Yep.
I wanted to make a couple more comments about Cthulhu before we move
Sure.
on.
By all means.
No, we're done with Cthulhu.
You guys had meant, well, I'm just going to plow right ahead anyway. You can talk simultaneously, and we'll
Promise.
see how it shakes out in the editing.
His notes are actually in the language. So.
But, you guys had mentioned the language before, and I wanted to agree on that point. I feel like his language... I had mentioned in an earlier cast that we did on a book that shall not be named, but which had directly taken on Lovecraft, and I said, this book... At the time, I had said this book does so many things well from a, literary standpoint, and yet it adds up to nothing. We all unanimously agreed that it was not a good book.
It was the first thumbs
And
down from everybody,
It
right?
was, and it was the first unanimous thumbs down that we had, and then I had also said the weird thing about Lovecraft is that he does so many things poorly from a literary standpoint, and yet it somehow adds up to something that is far greater than the sum of all its literary parts. The language is one thing. It is just ridiculously overwrought, over-decorated, like labyrinthine prose. Like you said, you have to use a dictionary to look up half of his words. It's almost as if you took Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven and you were like, let's just write stories in that language,
Yeah.
Which we've been doing via email for the past week.
Yes, we have, and preparation. But
Oh, it's so great.
But it works. Like, Lovecraft makes it work, and it only would work in the cosmic horror genre, and for these kind of stories, which are meant to be a sort of mythology, right? More so than being supernatural, they're meant to be and Lovecraft himself was a huge reader of mythology as a young man. That was a huge influence on him. And that's what he does. That's what the Cthulhu mythos is. It's a creation of his own mythology. An extremely fucking terrifying and creepy and nihilistic mythology.
Really had to have a terrible inner mind and inner life.
And we'll get to all that. But
I read some stuff online about him.
yes, and we will definitely bring all that up. That's coming. But that's what he does, and he, I think in this story, you know, it's not just like a fucking random monster that they're coming across, right? It's supposed to be this elder god from the stars who at one time ruled all of Earth before mankind was a thing, and who has only been sleeping in his city waiting for like the right time to like reassert. You know, it's this creation of like this larger mythology and this like, you know, we talked about this during Star Wars too, the way in which it's constantly alluded to like this vaster universe, you know,
Right.
and that's what Lovecraft, for me, I think as a very young man, what was so compelling was that idea of like this vaster, very ancient and very terrifying universe. You know, it felt like a complete mythology instead of just like a random ghost or a random monster.
Well, I think Lovecraft can pull that off because he wrote all of this on the cusp of so much more modern science.
I was just thinking that. These are like
Right.
mid to late 20s.
Yeah.
Right, and a lot of that it was like, oh, well, what's out there? And scientists were just starting to discover exoplanets that we had never identified
Right.
before.
Still 20 years away from satellites.
Right, this was where pretty much you could make up anything you wanted.
Yeah.
And it could fit with what was going on, or the discovery of, you know, time periods where, you know, dinosaurs did not exist, other things ruled the earth. And
Archean time. I'm
indeed.
going to keep coming back to that.
All these things that were just sort of like on the cusp, the bleeding edge of scientific theory, and he's taking that and then turning it into a Genesis story almost of all of this mythology he's building.
And you're right, he brings in that, you know, I mean Lovecraft is as much science fiction as he is dark fantasy, as he is horror. And we haven't got to Whisper in the Darkness yet, but he specifically mentions Pluto multiple times, which had literally just been discovered as he was writing that story, you know, so he weaves that stuff into it.
Moment of silence for Pluto.
Yes.
Moment over.
No.
Pouring one out for Pluto.
Yes.
Yeah. It's still there. It's
It was
not
a
a planet.
It was a planet briefly.
It's a dwarf
and then-
planet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's ready to be mined.
There you go.
It made the team and then it got cut.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It didn't make the 52-man roster.
JV planet.
This is a good transition over to Dunwhich horror. Speaking
Yep.
of, you know, the mythos and the kind of horror he builds. I started with Dunwich horror is my second piece actually. I started with Cthulhu, Dunwich horror, then Mountains of Madness, and then went over to Whisper, and I felt like that was a very familiar kind of story in modern telling. You know, again, man fucks with something we should have fucked with. Opens doors he shouldn't have opened.
Yep.
Can't understand. The very first thing I thought of actually was Stranger Things.
I have not watched Stranger Things.
What?
What? It's like Ghostbusters, motherfucker.
Jesus.
Future podcasts.
We got
But
that's
it's
a
on.
lot though. That's like 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah, that's a commitment.
That's a lot of
We
time.
could pick a season and we can.
Sure,
that-
it would be the first one.
That's a watch. You know, that's
That's
a
a
night.
binge.
That's a night watch with your significant other, and
Yeah.
and you know, get down to business. And
this time of year.
And being a man.
Should
of
I
your age would
describe
appreciate
the
it.
show and getting on to business, or should we just stick to the show?
You're not
when we
Netflix
get
and
to the
chilling.
podcast.
I'm not sure. I must have missed a reference in here somewhere.
I assumed you said watch with your significant other.
Oh,
Get down to business.
No.
Yeah.
What the hell
What
did you
business
mean
are
by
you
that?
talking about?
I meant watching the damn show. I'm sorry. I'm old. I assume that doesn't happen anymore.
Oh,
Aw. So
it.
essentially, I'm going to try to save Mike here. So essentially,
was I wrong for interpreting it? that
no,
way?
that's how I took it
I'm
too.
sorry, I feel
I
really
thought you were
terrible.
making a Netflix and chilling reference.
I made absolutely no. I did not intentionally mean that at all. Dear God, this is my life now.
We are in the man's house. How dare you speak to him like that?
No, but to me, getting down to business is watching TV and going to bed.
Oh. Pouring one out for Sean.
Wah, wah.
Well, it's worth a watch.
So
That's
we
fair.
were saying Dunwich. You were
Yeah,
saying
we're
it was a
Dunwich.
familiar kind of story.
Yeah. So, you know, people dabbling, wanting powers that they shouldn't have, you know, wanting what they can't have, and then, oops, it goes wrong.
Yeah. So I'll go first on this one. Dunwich has always been one of my least favorite Lovecraft stories. Now, I included it because it's also considered one of his, you know, most well-known and most well-regarded stories. So I felt objectively that we should cover it. But it would be hard I would be hard pressed to say why it's one of my least favorite stories. It has all the usual Lovecraft elements. I mean, it has the narrator who's not directly involved. You know, he works at the university and he is like sort of indirectly involved in the events. And
Miskatonic comes up a few times.
yeah, Miskatonic and you know, Arkham University, which is where the Batman Arkham Insane Asylum takes its name from, and but you know, I don't know, and I usually love the idea of like the backwoods, you know, the sort of very rural country horror is like very fascinating to me. And I can read this story and I can, like I said, objectively understand why other people like this one. For some reason, I don't know. We talked about anticlimax with Cthulhu, and this one really reeks of that to me. The monster bursts out, it like plows down somebody's house, and it seems terrifying.
You don't see it though.
And the monster, exactly, where it's all description of like, you know, third, fourth hand, right? Like, oh, apparently this is happening down at so-and-so's farm, and
it had half a face.
Exactly.
Because they're through the field glass.
Right, and you
which
know,
is fine.
And then it's not just a monster, it's supposed to be like the channeling into this dimension of this like intergalactic Yog-Sothoth or whatever it's called, which is supposed to be like a god, like a deity, right?
Yog-Sothoth or whatever.
Yes,
yeah,
and yet these professors like show up and like, you know, do some incantation and like the thing like explodes and the story ends. So I don't know, like I'm not criticizing the story. I understand personally why people like it and why it's become, you know, an integral part of the so-called mythos. It's just not one of my favorites to read. It just doesn't register in an entertaining way for me.
Is it, was the creature the same thing that was in At the Mountains of Madness?
No, that's the Shoggoth or Shogoth.
They're very close.
Right. They're both like blob monsters.
Yeah.
But Yog-Sothoth, or how let's just pronounce it however the fuck we want to pronounce them. And, man was not meant to pronounce these names without being driven mad anyway. So
That's right. That's right.
Seeing as I'm not mad.
But that is in the pantheon of Lovecraftian gods. The one in Dunwhich is their attempt to channel into the real world an actual, like, you know, galactic deity of some kind. Whereas the Shoggoths or however it's pronounced at the Mountains of Madness are just a creation of the Elder Ones.
Oh, okay, that's right.
Basically for slave labor.
They're slaves, yeah. The monster from Dunwich Horror gets called the Yog-Sothoth. Sothoth.
Yeah.
And then it's,
See, what I liked about that story...
You only got so many letters, but come on, man.
This should be a thing on Wheel of Fortune.
Do you remember the South Park episode where they talk about a Family Guy episode by pushing, like, balls with words across and it forms, like, a Family Guy sketch?
Yeah.
You imagine, like, Lovecraft coming up with his monster names by picking, like, you know, like, little letter tiles out.
Yeah,
Tiles,
it's very Dadaism. Like, he just has all the letters cut out on paper, drops it, and sees what
I
sticks.
got a C, a T,
Could
an
be.
H, an L. Cthulhu.
I actually kind of liked the Dunwich Horror. And I think what I liked the most about it was just the, like, I don't know, the way it sort of just builds up to it. It almost has like a Ghostbusters feel. Of course, that explains why you didn't like it.
Check out our Ghostbusters
No
episode from a couple of months ago.
But just the I don't know, like the old academics all kind of getting together, and they're the ones that they are called upon to do.
That's
their
why we like
duties
this
to
one.
mankind.
Yeah,
it's a bunch of English
the guys
teachers.
with the books.
The
Yes.
superheroes are the smart guys from the university.
That's right.
And they're
Pushes
like,
his glasses up.
thank you. But the like the creature that was like the son of the insane lady and the insane dude's grandson thing that was like a goat creature, but it wasn't. It was like there was some bizarre shit going on with that thing.
Yeah.
Like he was like 4 years old and he was like a 27-year-old or whatever, but he had like tentacles growing out where his dick should be and like all kinds of weirdness going on. And it was just like this, like, man, who the fuck comes up with this shit?
I had thought that actually, like, as you envision these monsters, like, was peyote a thing?
A dog bites him and he fucking like turns into vapor.
Yeah.
Like, because he was trying to find a book in a university library.
The Necronomicon, which we have not name dropped yet, but
No.
But that I kept thinking all the time about Evil Dead whenever he mentioned Necronomicon. But we'll get to that later. Maybe. I don't know.
Well, he does predate
True.
Necronomicon.
That's true. That's where it comes
But
from.
I mean that name itself, gets used pretty widely in horror literature.
It all stems from Lovecraft. Lovecraft, created the concept of the Necronomicon by the mad Arab, Abdul, whatever.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a man.
And everything.
We'll get to
Yes.
We'll get to that later,
Of course,
too.
yeah, we're going to get to
bit.
all of this.
But the thing I like
You're
the
all
low
night.
stakes of it. Like I think like some of the other ones, the stakes are it's like mankind versus everything kind of.
Right.
This was more of like farmhouses,
Right.
and a small community of like inbreds, and like
Literally is, yeah.
right.
Nobody visits Dunwich. In fact, I love the like first page or so where he's like, I was just riding, and I'm like, oh shit, I went through Dunwich. Oh,
Yeah.
that's essentially the first page.
Right, he says something along the lines of there's a fork in the road and most people go one way. If you accidentally go the other way, you try to get through Dunwich as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about New Jersey, by the way.
Oh, yeah, come on now. New Jersey's got some lovely
it's-
places.
Have we checked
Garden State, my ass. It's the petrochemical refinery state.
That's only a small portion of it.
I assume, Adam, that you've checked the data and you're quite confident that we don't have listeners from New
I'm
Jersey.
absolutely confident.
Hey!
My sister-in-law who lives in New Jersey does not listen.
We gotta
to
get
this.
some listeners in Jersey.
None of us are wearing tracksuits. We're not going to do it.
We'll get some hot dogs next time.
Yeah. I liked it. I thought it was alright.
Yeah.
I do like Dunwich.
It's great. It's like I said, it's one of those ones where I academically respect the story. For some reason, that one doesn't entertain me. There's about 25 or 30 Lovecraft stories I would read first if I were just sitting down to read a story.
Having only read 4, I put that one up there with At the Mountains of Madness as one of my favorites.
Yeah.
I liked it.
It's
So
interesting.
it's in your top 4 is what you're saying.
Yes.
There you go.
Absolutely. Top 3. I'll give you top 3.
Okay.
You mentioned Cloverfield earlier, Mike, and I got kind of Cloverfield vibes because we're watching from afar. You only get those brief glimpses of the monster, and it kind of keeps you in suspense on what it looks like as they fight it.
Right.
You don't even see the fight. You just kind of sort of see the guys standing on the hill.
Right, and before that, there's the lady who's screaming into the telephone, and then the farmhouse is found destroyed. And
Yeah.
I mean, but you're right. You never directly observe. I mean, like I said, Lovecraft wrote an entire essay about horror fiction, supernatural horror in fiction, I believe is the name of the essay. And he says, this is pretty, it should be in that book. It's pretty close to a quote. He says, the oldest emotion of mankind is fear. And the oldest kind of fear is fear of the unknown, or something like that. And then he goes on in this essay to talk about, that's why in his fiction, it's always from a distance. It's always a detached perspective. Because again, it's the idea that as soon as you open that door and show the audience the creature, it's always a letdown. It's always disappointing. Sort of like opening your presents Christmas morning. It was the anticipation that you enjoyed.
Get the impression that Lovecraft never got Christmas presents.
Yeah. He was a sad, lonely little man.
Yeah.
I get
tall
man.
I shouldn't say little man, but sad and lonely for sure.
Oh, for sure. I get the impression he would have just stared at the what is it, the buffalo check or plaid wrapping paper, and was like, "No man was meant to live without going mad." Truly,
Yeah. What is even the point in a universe that doesn't care if we even exist?
fucking wrapping paper. Doesn't even rip it off. He just leaves it in the corner, and it just sits there.
This idea of tradition and love is just laughable.
Who can know if there is a Santa Claus who would bring to us? Is he one of the great old ones? Where is his
And
cult?
if there is a Santa Claus, you don't want to know what he's really like. At best,
Boundaries of madness.
At best, he doesn't give a fuck if we exist.
I think we need to do a fan fiction of Lovecraft Santa Claus.
Lovecraft Santa Claus.
Of
course, he's got tentacles and goes as he delivers your presents.
God. His servants are blind penguins
Yes.
Oh,
they came
man.
back.
and Sugoths or
This is
whatever.
my only issue.
This
with
might have to
Lovecraft.
happen. A very Lovecraft Christmas.
Oh!
Mike just did it.
Bing, bing, bing!
Yes, 1,000 points tonight for Mike.
We could do a read-along. We could write the story and then I'll do my best, read-along voice.
There
With
you
a
go.
crackling fire in the
Deep it in
background.
there, yeah.
Oh, that'd be great.
All right.
'Twas the night before Christmas. And all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even the sucked off. Oh. Do you guys want to switch over to Whisper in Darkness before we talk about Mountains of Madness?
Yes.
Sure.
Right.
Yes.
Why not?
All
Let's
right.
do Whisperer.
Fuck that motherfucker. I'm gonna say.
Go ahead.
Oh!
Open
I
it
got
up.
all this correspondence from this guy that all goes in one direction, and then all of a sudden I got this typed prim letter telling me, "Oh, come on out and bring all the evidence with you." And the fucker
It's fine.
doesn't. What the absolute fuck?
Yeah.
What was this? I mean, it was just like the dumbest ass narrator of all time. This is like, I could have seen, my fucking 8-year-old could have seen this from a mile away. Are you
This is true.
fucking kidding me?
My kid's totally been like, nah, Dick, don't do that.
Why are you taking the cylinder, you idiots?
Yeah.
All the other stuff, clearly it's a setup. Oh, maybe it's just my modern sensibilities, but I'm sitting there reading this going
It
like,
could be.
nah, there's no fucking way. Come on, dude. Get over. What? Seriously? Oh, I don't place the voice. The voice sounded familiar, but I don't know where I got it. It's from the recording, you asswipe.
I can tell you where you heard that voice before.
It's on your beeswax cylinder.
Yeah.
The reason I like this story is, the whole idea of like a race of aliens who are using planet Earth to mine some kind of mineral.
But dogs
and,
kill
like,
them.
Yes. Look, Sean, I am the first one to tell you that all of these stories are ridiculous on obvious levels. But it's the premise. It's the idea.
What is more
of,
horrific than the ridiculous?
True.
Yeah,
True.
There you go. I think Lovecraft said that actually. That was it was in that essay that we mentioned. No, but the idea of like this ancient civilization of aliens that use Earth as like a mining planet. It feeds into like that overall mythology of like that larger, more terrifying universe.
I can see that too. I do.
I mean, that's what I like about it. I mean, it's simply put, like, the whole idea of like the bring the evidence with you, and it's all fine. What a mistake! I was just being an ass before. It's cool. It's like obviously as readers we're like, yeah, you know what's going to happen. And even though he puts it in italics at the end, like he always does, he says like they were the face and hands of whatever his name was. As a reader, you're sitting there like, oh, really? Wow.
Now, is this just like...
No shit.
Is this just like 21st century, like jaded, nihilistic us?
Yes.
It has to
As
be.
readers,
There was no other
I think so.
explanation. Yeah.
Yeah, because it had to have read differently to like 1930s weird science fiction readers.
Well, I'm not sure anybody else had written about fungus crabs
Right.
that were mining.
Fungus crabs are... Yes.
Yeah, mining the mountains of Vermont
Yes,
for whatever.
That's the other thing, too, is like all of this shit was so different from everything else. Horror, like fantasy, like, many genres, it relies on its tropes, right? And when you talk about horror, you have your ghosts and your werewolves and your vampires, and you have the same old things in which authors like maybe do a slight variation on it. Frankenstein, the sort of the reanimated Gollum monster, right? But what Lovecraft did was just fucking blow all that shit up, and like you just described it perfectly. These fungus monsters mining Earth is like, you don't see that, at least in this time period, you don't see that anywhere else. And he is influenced very heavily by Edgar Allan Poe, but you don't see that shit in Poe, right? Poe is all like very realistic, human psychological stuff. What Lovecraft brings to it is the idea of like this ancient universe in which like mankind is a recent development.
I have to say that I was always, throughout this whole thing, struck by the novelty of his creations. Like these crab fungus creatures that have no obvious sensory organs or heads other than their like weird antennae array at the top, and just like how everything else about them is very like crab-like. It's just...
Yeah, they have some directionality, but that's pretty much it.
Right, and like the great old ones, we'll get to it, and the same thing, like the biology of them is extremely unique, and I cannot fault the man for going way in a whole other direction.
Right.
Like, usually you think of horror, you think of it being like familiar yet tainted.
Right.
Yeah.
Like a vampire is familiar but tainted, or a mummy, or a werewolf, or a Frankenstein, or any of these things. They're all sort of that, like, oh, well, they look vaguely human, but there's something
Human
off.
gone wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
But Lovecraft goes completely the other direction. Like, this is beyond anything.
Let's not
Like,
give a fuck.
human doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? This is beyond human. This is something completely other.
Well, one of you guys said a few minutes ago, who the fuck thinks of this shit? You know, and that is what,
Yeah.
to me, that is the beauty of Lovecraft, is as you're reading these stories, you're constantly going, what the fuck?
Yeah.
What the
Yeah.
fuck is this shit? And honestly, to me, that's what I want in horror. Like, I want it to be something that's like really alien and foreign and bizarre, because that would be more terrifying than, like, you know, a vampire which just has like pointing teeth but is otherwise, you know, just one of us and it just looks human.
It's interesting because I think animically, I kind of disagree a little bit, because I feel like the familiarity of the other being more terrifying that it's so close to you.
Yeah.
I feel like the
Kind of
so
like us.
yes, like it's a reflection of us.
Yeah.
But to me, it's less terrifying if it's completely unrelated. I could walk by a crab fungus and be like, hey, look at that fucking thing, you know? And it's like, exactly. It to me it'd be meaningless, I guess, maybe. But I guess at the same time, Lovecraft does a really good job of generating that same sense of like foreboding around these things.
Well,
too.
yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, and that is, we haven't made this point yet, but that is really, for all the literary sins that Lovecraft has, you know, that, you know, you don't usually associate with the great writers, it's really, it's the atmosphere. I mean, it's the atmosphere first and foremost. That's what makes every Lovecraft tale, is the atmosphere. But, you know, secondly, it is, you just said, the tension. You know, it's the way in which it's not really about the plot, because there's usually not a plot, you know. It's not about the dialogue, because there's almost never dialogue. It's not about the character development, because we just know those motherfuckers are mad. Whatever they were before, they're crazy now.
Yeah.
Right? It's not about any of that shit. And it's never about the payoff, because the payoff is always a little disappointing. It's literally just about the atmosphere first and foremost, and then it's about, like, the tension, the way in which he, like, keeps you sort of on the hook. Like, what the fuck is this shit? You know? And
Yeah.
a little unsettled the whole time.
It's like a rainy fall day in New England.
Well, a lot of his
Rhode
work
Island.
comes from, okay, I visited Vermont. Now I'm going to write this fuck-up story about Vermont. All right, I was in Massachusetts. Now let's go to this.
Right.
Thanks to the notes from the HP Lovecraft Complete Fiction, you know, I got a decent chronology of, okay, he was visiting here and this year, and he wrote this. And then the other thing, you know, Dunwhich Horror came from his visits on the New England area. And it's actually kind of a interesting point that setting plays an important part in Mountains of Madness, in Dunwich Horror, but it doesn't seem to play much in the other pieces that we read. It is really just the horror of, like, this undiscovered thing that could really fuck mankind over if they decided to, or they could just ignore us. And therein lies the dread, like, will we be ignored, or will we be seen, and fuck, there goes humanity at that point.
It's sort of like he just kind of puts them away from most civilization, so that it's like, oh, it's distant, but not that distant.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's, you know, we talked about, like, similar but different when it comes to horror, and, you know, like Dunwich, they're backcountry hillbillies, essentially, in New England. You know, they're country people in New England. Antarctica, that's just remote from everybody, so it's there, but it's still on Earth. Watch out.
It's crazy. You read this shit too. It's like there's a lot of places in that northeast area of the United States that are just wild. Mm-hmm. There's wilderness
in the 20s,
up there.
yeah. I mean, there still is.
Yeah.
Right? You think of Jersey Devil, like that being a urban
That's
legend.
New Jersey.
Petrochemical refinery state. Fuck you, New Jersey.
You go to Maine, 90% of their population lives along the coast and the next to Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Most of that is moose country, and there is like nobody there. You know?
Vermont, 90% of people live in Burlington. No, I'm making that stat up. Live in Burlington, and that's it. I don't know. Bernie Sanders lives there. That's really all I got, right? But that's a good point, though. Like, a lot of New England is not urbanized as we might think of it. Even still, really, there. You know, we joke about New York State when people are like, "Oh, you live in New York? How's New York City?" No, fuck you. I'm 8 hours from New York City.
Right.
But really, New England is bigger than we think it is, and he kind of exploits our misunderstandings even though they're in the 20s, and we're still 100 years removed from that. And you asked me about Antarctica. What the fuck do I know of Antarctica for Mountains of Madness except for ice?
Right.
And there are penguins. They live in the south, not the north. Period. I'm coming back to the blind penguins. They're not going away.
But he got it right. At least it was in the correct continent.
Yes, penguins were in Africa and also Antarctica.
I can't stand speculative fiction or that puts penguins at the North Pole or puts polar bears at the South Pole. And it's like, you fuckers.
Fuck you did it wrong.
Yes.
100% wrong.
Join us for the exciting conclusion in Nerds Talk Lovecraft Part 2.